Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing Radiant Historia, Perfect Chronology for the 3DS. Yes, that's right. If you watched the Nintendo Direct that came out today, March 8th to be precise, Nintendo is still supporting the 3DS into 2019. And this game actually just came out. Never gonna forget the release date for this one. It was Ash Wednesday and St. Valentine's Day. And it's also one of the few games on a Nintendo system where all of its DLC was available within just 2 weeks of the game's launch. That's mighty impressive. It makes Smash Brothers look kind of like a joke in comparison. So, I'm just going to state right off the bat that this is one of the hardest games I've ever had to review because it's the first port of a game that already existed in North America, but yet I never played the original. So, while I typically like to review remakes instead of the originals if I can help it, the review that I did of the original was my best friend doing most of the talking, because he actually played the original before either of us knew there would be a remake. So I'm going to mostly be treating this as a standalone game and use only minimalistic mentions of like, oh, this is an addition over the DS version. So you might be wondering, what is Radiant Historia in the first place, DS or 3DS? Well, if you've heard me blabbing about the Zero Escape trilogy, in fact, those are the games I've covered the most on this channel over anything else. It's essentially a time jumper, where the main character Stock has a book called The White Chronicle, and that gives him access to a mysterious realm known as Historia, which allows him to jump between timelines. Thankfully, there's only 2 instead of, like, too many, like in the Zero Escape series. So it's easier to keep track of the story, even though it still kind of gave me headaches at times. Thankfully, the game has minimal story reminders if you go to the flowcharts that you can at least sort of keep track of what happened. And you can replay any section of the game as many times as you want, even if the game doesn't give you the option to skip the battles. Now, let's move on to the gameplay, which honestly is, in my opinion, the weakest part of this game. If you're not a fan of Final Fantasy-style turn-based RPGs, then thankfully there's a remedy to that. But if you're the type of person that's a purist, let me just get the worst out of the way. It's very hard to explain how this works without a 3DS capture card, so I'm going to try my best to use my hands. So, for once I'm using the right hand. This side of the screen has a 3x3 grid where the enemies stand on. And the closer the enemies are to your party members, which are all on this side of the screen, the more damage they do. So not only do you have to be aware of the enemy's positions, but you also have to look at the bottom screen to see the turn order. So you might want your healer to go before your attacker, so you'd have to switch around their turn panels, keeping in mind that the enemies have turn panels too. That part is ingenious. The problem is that the battles themselves are way too random for my tastes. Coming from a person who loves the Paper Mario and Fire Emblem series, where they give you very detailed statistics of like the percentage of attack, how much attack you're going to give, how much damage the enemies are going to give, you basically have to do a lot of guesswork. And that makes for some really frustrating segments, like where I waste my magic power on an enemy that's already dead, or the new support maneuvers where a character sitting on the sidelines in your party might decide to attack instead, so you feel like you wasted a turn because you have no way of knowing when they'll show up. This can be a godsend in tough battles, but in battles where you're trying to conserve your magic or like meticulously plan out how you're going to attack the enemies, this can also be a pain. The other thing that's frustrating, I might as well just get the bad stuff out of the way because I have a lot of praise to heap on this game and I don't want it to get in the way. The other frustrating part of Perfect Chronology is the structure. Now, getting to the final battle, at least of the DS version, is easy enough. You just basically follow the the storyline as it's presented, and you should be good to go. The problem is getting to the credits, because you're required to get the true ending of the DS version. And there's also 2 new side quests that were added to the 3DS version that you also have to get those to make a truer ending. And then that in turn gives you the possibility of getting to the final boss of the 3DS version, which gives you the ultimate true ending. Yeah, I know, it's difficult to grasp. Thankfully, the 3DS version has several options to make this far less frustrating than I'm making it sound. First off, I want to talk about the new difficulty settings. There's 4 this time, as opposed to the DS version's 1. The one I particularly want to talk about is the new addition of Friendly Mode, which gives Stock an ability known as Hyper Strike, which allows him to defeat enemies on the field. Yes, that's right, they don't have random encounters! By just hitting them with his sword, and you still get experience and items that would have normally been dropped. Which, if you don't like the battles like yours truly, you can use Friendly Mode to just appreciate the storyline and use very minimalistic battles. And even the times when you're forced to do battles, they're only hard enough where you still have to think a little bit, but they're not grueling. In fact, I probably wouldn't have beaten the final boss had it not been for being able to switch to Friendly Mode. The game also has 14 whopping save files. I can't think of too many games that have more save files than that, which basically allow you to mix and match difficulties and modulators almost unlimitedly. And also, the 3DS version includes several additions to make the game slightly less frustrating. Characters with side quests will have icons above their head. There's a map on the bottom screen that makes navigation slightly easier, even if it's an extremely basic map. Okay, now let's talk about the actual game. It's a story-driven game, admittedly, like any other RPG, so I really don't want to talk too much about it. But it's definitely a game that heavily focuses on the concept of multiverses. In fact, once you beat the main story of the DS version, you get access to an entirely new segment where you meet a new character called Nemesia, where she allows you to explore possible histories that can actually affect some of the events of the original timelines. And it also gives you possibilities of like, let's explore what could have happened if certain things in the storyline went a little bit differently. That in turn gives you new perspectives, it gives you an excuse to get new dialogue in the DS timelines, and it allows for a truly spectacular visual masterpiece when you get to the true final boss. It also adds more lore to the already story-heavy original, filling out a couple of the blanks that the DS version left to your imagination, and providing true closure to a story that was kinda somewhat a cliffhanger in the original game. I really liked the addition of this new story content, and even better is if you've already played the DS version. Okay, challenge here. If there is anyone who has played either of these games, DS or 3DS, without first reading Nintendo Power, let me know in the comments, because I am not one of them. It takes me a long time to get into new games. And I really like how, like, you don't have to guess, like, anything. The game just, like, explains absolutely every little detail. And that's the kind of thing that, honestly, I wish games like Zero Time Dilemma would have done. As brilliant as that game's story is, they still left a lot to the imagination. Radiant Historia is like, nope, we're going to explain every little thing, including the root cause of the whole series. Oh my gosh, it's just so brilliant. And that leads me to the DLC, which, admittedly, it's hit or miss, most of it. You can get 2 new items, which are kind of pointless, because there's a new dungeon that's available that lets you basically grind anyway. Maybe they wanted to avoid the necessity of grinding. There's also the ability to purchase the original designs for the characters instead of the updated artwork, as well as chibi art, which, if you're wondering what that is, it's this. The problem is that you have to pay for it, which, why isn't it a freebie? I mean, it was free in the DS version, so why make you pay for it? The real meat of the DLC is when you decide to purchase additional Divergent histories, which admittedly aren't that much in the story department, and they're technically possible histories, so they're not directly canon with the existing story material, but they do give you options to further explore. Like, for example, the Meeting in the Chasm DLC lets you experience how Nemesia's quest started, as well as further insight into the origin story of the desertification, as well as the Under the Moonlight gives Stock a further opportunity to develop his relationships with female characters without being overly suggestive. On the other side of the spectrum, there's the Bathing in Mana DLC, which gives you the opportunity to get pictures of characters dressed in swimwear, which is kind of creepy for my tastes. But on the other hand, if you're one of those characters that is really having trouble with the battles and refuses to do friendly mode, it gives you the opportunity to fully refill your health, mana, and mana gauge at any time you want, which kind of a dumb way to do it, but, well, I mean, it could be worse. I mean, I decided to listen to YouTube footage of it because I didn't want overly suggestive material, and it was mostly harmless conversation between Stock and his party, helping to flesh out their personalities a bit and stuff like that without getting into M-rated territory, so they could have done worse. And honestly, from a Catholic standpoint, yes, I plan on doing a Catholic review of this. The game's not too suggestive besides the costumes. It's a mostly clean swords and sorcery type of storyline with the occasional bit of machinery incorporated into it. And it overall feels like the narrative is closer to the style of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which is one of my favorite stories ever made. Overall, Radiant Historia may have a hard time gathering an audience with its battle system, but you have an option to turn that off. And it's an absolute nightmare trying to get the credits. But if you can get the credits, here's a little hint for how to do it. Look for side quests that have keys on them. And if you manage to complete all of them, that will unlock the truer ending without any fuss. And the other addition that they made to make that easier is the addition of Perfect Mode, which incorporates the new story content into the existing DS content. So you can play it as one linear experience, basically letting you unlock the side quests as they come. Don't be an idiot like me and refuse to take side quests, because that'll just completely screw everything up. Either way, Radiant Historia is a must-buy, and as I've said with pretty much every remake I've reviewed, the 3DS port, from everything that I've heard, is the definitive version, masterfully making the storyline more closure, adding DLC, a dungeon to grind if the battles get to be too tough, 4 difficulty levels, plenty of DLC, and it also has really stellar production values. All of the music from the DS version is here in its original glory, and honestly, I would not have been able to guess that this was on a DS, because nearly every song is fully string orchestral, and even the ones that aren't have really amazing sound quality to them. And the new tracks are equally epic, making better use of the 3DS's additional musical capacities, with the original composer, Yoko Shimomura, returning of Kingdom Hearts fame. Yes, she has been on Nintendo systems. And the graphics are surprisingly nice. I really like the little attention to detail that they have in the fields, and the very detailed character models. Even if the voice acting is kind of weird, like, the main characters are fully voiced, but the side characters only have the grunts that Fire Emblem Awakening had, so it's a hit or miss, but you can turn it off if you prefer the silent approach of the original DS version. And there are minor nitpicks here and there where it seems like every time the game did something right, it seemed to do something wrong. But in the grand scheme of things, this is an absolutely magnificent story that really knows how to make the most of its multiverse setting to allow for some amazing twists and turns. And the game world is also relatively small, making for a heavier focus on storyline than exploration. So if you're one of those types of people that doesn't like massive, overly confusing RPG worlds, this is definitely the way to go. I cannot recommend this game enough. Just don't be ashamed if you have to look up an internet guide, because I certainly did. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you need more info on the original DS version, my best friend and I did a review of it a long time ago, so that'll help fill you in on the overall concept a bit more. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.